Steadfast love and faithfulness have met together. Righteousness and peace have kissed each other. Faithfulness shall spring up from the earth, and righteousness shall look down from heaven. Psalm 85. I love this psalm that we have assigned for today. Specifically, I love the verse, righteousness and peace have kissed each other. In the Bible, when we see the word righteousness, the word that is translated as righteousness, it's often the same word as the word for justice. So we might also, in our minds, translate that as justice. Justice and peace have kissed one another. Sometimes people look for peace. They look for peace that sacrifices justice. Maybe you're familiar with that concept. A peace where we say, don't speak up, don't rock the boat, don't make a conflict where there isn't none. When someone wants to speak up for justice, they say, oh, just like keep the peace. Just keep it smooth. But this is a false peace. People who want world peace, but don't want anything to change in terms of the structures of power and poverty and hunger, people who want people to just stop fighting and just be okay with these differences and injustices, that kind of peace is a false peace. So what this psalm is talking about here is a peace that comes not just from being quiet in the face of injustice. It's a peace that comes from people actually having what they need. A peace that comes from the world being in balance, being level, just like the heart of God. We are called to a true peace, and we are called to be bearers of the bad news that the world that we see around us is not level, that the world that we see around us is not this vision of peace and justice kissing one another. And we are called to remember that silence in the face of that injustice is not a value. That's not peace. That's not us being peacemakers. Amos was not a peacemaker in this false peace kind of way. Amos spoke up. That's what made him a prophet. And he quotes God. He says, "See, I am setting a plumb line in the midst of my people Israel. I will never again pass them by. The high places of Isaac shall be made desolate, and the sanctuaries of Israel shall be laid waste, and I will rise against the house of Jeroboam with the sword." Jeroboam being the king of Israel at that time. God is saying, you're not going to have peace, because this peace that you have is unjust. Of course, Jeroboam does not like that very much. And those in power also don't like it. And they tell Amos, you need to go somewhere else. Go prophesy in Judah. So we got Israel and Judah next to each other. And this is in Israel. And they say, go over there. Go prophesy in Judah. We can't handle what you're saying. We can't handle the truth. That famous quote. But Amos says, I'm not a prophet. I'm just a normal dude. Like, I'm not out making my money being a prophet. I care for these trees and these animals. I'm just a person. I'm not a prophet professionally. I live here and work here. I'm just speaking up and speaking truth. This is the life that we're called to. We're called to this life of speaking up and speaking truth and making the level waters choppy for people. People don't like that very much, but that's what we're called to, is to call that out, to call out the lack of levelness, the lack of justice that we see around us. Unfortunately, these readings in some ways are not very hopeful today. We get in Amos God saying, you have to change People of Israel, you have to change. You have to be made level again. And people who listen need to speak up. But then we find out in the Gospel of Mark what happens to those people. What happens to John? John speaks out when Herod marries someone he shouldn't have married. He marries his brother's wife. And John speaks out and says, this is unjust and this is against the law of God. And Herod kind of knows he's right. Herod knows he's right, but his new wife does not like John preaching these things. And so Herod puts John in prison. Even though Herod kind of likes listening to John, he's kind of compelled by what John has to say. And then we hear this story of the tragic birthday party. The birthday party that Herod throws for himself, and the birthday party where his daughter, stepdaughter, it's unclear, is made to dance for everyone, to display herself. And he's so impressed, he makes this reckless promise to do anything she says. He's probably drunk. He's probably feeling like this just shows off how amazing and wealthy and untouchable he is. And he makes this reckless promise. And of course, he ends up having to do something he didn't want to do. Or so he thinks. He thinks he has to. He doesn't have to. He could choose the right thing in this situation. He could choose to let go of his ego. He could choose to lose face in the face of these people and go back on what he said he was going to do, because now he's being asked to do something unjust. But he cares more about his image. He cares more about his power. He cares more about his ego and his status. And so he does it anyway. And he kills John in a gruesome way. Before the end of the party, John has been beheaded. Beheaded simply for speaking out. Not for creating an army and raising it up against Herod. Simply for his words, he is killed. So when I read these two passages from Amos and from Mark, I feel like I'm in this catch-22. I feel like Amos is saying, hey, if you don't act justly and speak truth to power, the world is going to come crashing down. Terrible things are going to happen. You can't let that be your legacy. You have to speak up now before it's too late. But then John is saying, the story about John and Mark is saying, if you speak up now, you are going to be destroyed. So it feels like either way, I feel like I'm going to be destroyed. And Christians throughout the centuries have felt this way. They have felt this pull, this catch-22 of being asked to do something that is so countercultural, it's dangerous. So what's the way forward? What are we supposed to do as Christians? What are we supposed to do when doing the right thing has such negative consequences in our lives? What is the good news in this story? That's what I'm always supposed to be preaching about the good news, the gospel. So what is the good news in this story? What is the way forward? When I think about these readings, I mostly see grotesqueness. I see a head on a platter being presented to a teenage girl. I see drunken men eyeing a young teenage girl. I see Amos being told to leave his place of living. So where's the beauty? I overlook the beauty sometimes when I look at this passage. I do find beauty in this passage. There's beauty in the very last line of our passage today. Very last line of the gospel. Look at it. What does it say? The very last sentence of today's gospel, that's where the beauty is. When his disciples heard about it, they came and took his body and laid it in a tomb. His disciples heard about it, and they came. They came to the authorities and asked for the body of John the Baptist. They came to the prison, presumably where he was beheaded. They asked for the body. That's a risky move in and of itself, to step forward and say, I'm with the guy you just killed. Could we please have his body? It's time for some beauty. It's time for us to honor this man who's been killed. It's time for us to gather together and grieve in community. They took his body and laid it in a tomb. I really like what commentator Matt Skinner says from Luther Seminary. If there is a hint of good news surrounding John's death, it resides in his followers who refuse to be intimidated. John foresaw a different world about to emerge. His disciples advanced that vision through their simple yet difficult act of faithfulness. Opposition to the reign of God takes a toll and has lasting consequences, but it never has the last word. End quote. The way forward is to respond to God's call to seek justice, but not to do it alone. To build a community and to lean on that community, a community that together asserts a different way of being, a community that mourns together when the world presses in on us, a community that picks up the torch when someone is too worn down to continue, a community that still stands back up and does the hard, beautiful thing, even after the horror. We are living in a time where there is much fear and much evil fighting to take over power in the world. It is a scary time. The events of yesterday inspire even more fear with an assassination attempt against one of our candidates and our former president. This violence is terrifying, and we fear for the violence that may be to come. So what do we do? What do we do when we see what might be coming for our country, and we also know that doing something about it might lead us directly into that place of violence? I quote Matt Skinner again, "We don't always have the power to rein in the destructive potential of self-obsessed rulers, toxic values, and an unwillingness to listen to truth. But Herod Antipas and his household remind us that innocent people will suffer when we don't use the power that is available to us." What do faithful resistance and courageous hope look like in your context? End quote. What does faithful resistance and courageous hope look like in our context? How can we, not as individuals, but as a community, as a relational network of people, what power do we have? Because we do have power available to us. We have the power to pick up that torch that has been carried from generation to generation in fighting this kind of violence and resisting injustice. We have the power to pick up that torch, and even though the path is dangerous and hard, we have one another to continue to have moments of beauty, to continue to have moments where justice and peace can meet together. We pray for that world described by the psalmist, the world where justice and peace kiss each other, but we're not there yet. And our hope cannot be simply in hoping that that will happen someday. We also have to root our hope in the here and now, our hope in the ways that we build community, the way that we build that fabric of relationship where we do the beautiful things together, even when we're not there yet. That's what we do as a church community. And I pray that we will do it in this time, in this turbulent time in our country, that we will be that for each other, and we will continue to move forward together. Amen.